Hello, friends. Welcome to the Unblocked podcast. I am your host, Jessica Smarro. Thank you for tuning in, as always. Today, I have with me Robin Kiesler, and I'm just going to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Robin because she's pretty incredible. She's a life coach for leaders and entrepreneurs, and she helps these entrepreneurs who are ready to step into radical self-love and personal healing. And she takes it to a whole nother level. And the goal really is to help them become their biggest ally instead of their biggest block. And y'all know that we are all about getting unblocked around here. So I love this. Robin is here to help entrepreneurs experience radical self-love, unconditional joy, and mind-bending success. Not just success, y'all, mind-bending success through the art of identity coaching that will leave you forever transformed in the best way possible. So thank you for being here, Robin. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. So I want to set the stage a little bit for today's conversation. So for those of you who are listening to this episode in real time, you will be listening as we are going into May, and May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And Robin had a great idea for a project in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm just going to turn it over to you, Robin, to tell us about this incredible project that you are working on and convening and spearheading.
Oh, baby, here we go. This is going to be so much fun. It is a project that I am doing with Jessica and a host of other life coaches. And we are talking about mental health as it relates to these ideas of leadership and identity, success in business, and how to navigate these challenges in a way that's more loving, a little smoother, and also that really helps us to, hopefully, the goal is to help us be able to release our resistance to it. And so part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this is because I feel like there are so many people in the world still that associate mental health with mental illness. Or even if mental illness seems like a strong word for you, I think there are a lot of people that think of mental health as something that's wrong with someone or with you, right? If you're having a mental health crisis or a mental health episode, it's like it has this underlying tone of like something's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is such a limited scope, right? That you're doing yourself such a disservice to think about it that way. Because as I talked about my podcast episode with Jessica, which you guys will all be hearing soon.
Yes, go check it out. It's brilliant. Obviously, we had such a great time. But listen, I want to say something about that. This is what was so fun. It was like, I got so much out of it, which is so, not even, not, and here's what I'll say about that. Not because like there was so much wisdom coming out of my mouth, but two things. One, it was great conversation, but I think this is the fun of synergy and of community and bringing people together in conversation. Stuff came out of us that doesn't come out on our own. And I think this even speaks to, I mean, I don't know your full why behind this project, but I think even just that the experience that happened just inside that podcast episode, I think that's the value of bringing people together. Something like this summit is that in community, people are two people. That's the smallest community you can have, right? Like in this community, stuff comes out that wasn't there before. And so I'm super excited just based on that one podcast episode. I'm super excited to see what's going to come out of convening multiple coaches having conversations around mental health, mental illness, mental wellness, mental fitness, whatever language resonates for you. So
totally. Yeah. And I think you nailed it. That's exactly it. It's like, I think, when we talk about mental health, it's like, that was, again, one of the things we talked about was that it's a spectrum, right? That's what you said. You're like, it's a spectrum. It's like joy is a part of mental health, y'all. Joy, love, sex, intimacy, like getting outside, the physical body, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, it's all together. You can't separate it. You are a whole human with all these parts of you. And you have the dark side, right? The shadow side, which we talked about. And you also have the light side. And the shadow side is not an accident. It's not a part of you that's broken or wrong. It's a part of you that's essential. And it's a part of you that's beautiful. And it's a part of you that's here to serve you in the most amazing ways. And as long as we're demonizing the shadow and those parts of us that we're ashamed of or afraid of or that we don't like, we are doing ourselves and our families and our communities a disservice because then we're missing out on everything it has to give us. And
Oh, that's
so
so good.
the reason that I wanted to do this mental health awareness, this project, this collaboration, is because I was just thinking about all of that. And if you go and check out the podcast and follow me on all the places, I'm going to be talking with you guys more about this and over this week prior, probably to before this launches, and really sharing a little bit more of my story and my experience that made me really want to do that. And I can talk about that a little bit more here too if you want. But I had my own, mental health crisis and my own little breakdown yet again, yet another.
Mm-hmm.
And it was beautiful. I find such beauty in the
Mm.
brokenness because on the other side of that brokenness is always this gold right here that's happening. That's where this conversation came from.
Oh, I love the one-liners. You said the beauty and the brokenness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are some powerful words. And before I do want to jump into that. And I just want to make sure before we kind of launch into that, was there anything else you wanted to say about the project? I think I got so excited about what's happening and I already know what's happening. And I don't know if you said it. So I just
Yeah.
you want to tell the people
I
like, what
can.
is this
Yeah. We can.
project? Yeah.
Heck yeah. So we're starting this project May 1st. I'm going to be releasing a series of podcast interviews with different leaders and entrepreneurs talking about leadership and mental health and what their challenges have been, mental and emotional challenges, and just sharing their stories, sharing their vulnerabilities, both in an effort to normalize this experience. Like right now, I feel super anxious. I
Mm.
did before I got on, and it's okay, right? Like that anxiety, it's like that feeling, it's there for something, right? It's trying to protect me, it's trying to communicate with me. There's stuff happening. So it's not a problem. It's all good, baby, right? And
Mm.
so allowing these other entrepreneurs and leaders in the industry to come in, and I may even actually ask my mom if she'll come do one with me. Um
Oh, fun.
and and there's a whole lot more about that we can talk about later, but people from all different walks of life talking about mental and emotional health and sharing that story to normalize it and also to help celebrate it, right? Like, how is this thing really, like you said before, my ally instead of my
Mm.
block? And
Uh-huh.
so there'll be the podcast interviews each day leading up to a grand finale event, which is going to happen May 19th through 21st. So that weekend, we're going to have a live summit and we are going to come together live, and Jessica and so many of these other entrepreneurs are going to come in and we're going to actually give you support, actual support more than just conversation, to help you not only embrace these shadow parts of you, but learn how to nurture them and heal them so that you can experience greater connection with yourself and with others, so that you can have joy along the journey and you don't need to just be living in stress, right? About whether or not
Mm-hmm.
you're winning and it's like we can just drop all that and allow ourselves to have joy and actual impact and momentum because we're no longer resisting, because we're unblocked, right?
Oh, hello.
So we can
So
go.
good. Uh-huh.
So that's the layout.
Oh, that's so good. I'm so excited for this. So you started saying a little bit about the why, and you said something that stuck in my head, and you said something about releasing our resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell a little more, like resistance to what exactly?
Yes, releasing our existence to the experience of the 50-50, right?
Mm.
So releasing our resistance to when things aren't rainbows and daisies, right? When we're going through the trenches, when we're going through, the river of misery, as we call it,
Mm-hmm.
and those when we're really in the throes of our shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you that don't know what I mean when I talk about the shadow side is the concept that I originally heard first from Debbie Ford, comes originally from Carl
Love
Jung, I
Debbie.
believe. Love Debbie Ford. She did a project with Deepak Chopra and Marianne Williamson. And it's called The Shadow Effect. She wrote a book. There's so much out there, but it's talking about these parts of ourselves, these dark parts, right? The parts of ourselves that we don't think are pretty, the parts of ourselves that we don't enjoy, right? I don't necessarily enjoy being anxious.
Right.
But I don't need to resist it anymore. And when I'm able to stop resisting it and begin getting curious about it and breathing into it and going to that place, which we'll talk about probably a little bit more later, and when we are willing to go through this process that we're all going to kind of share with you through these interviews and inside the summit, what I find is that as I release the resistance, I gain so much more momentum because I'm not adding on additional suffering. So when I'm feeling anxious, that's one thing. But then when I start feeling anxious about being anxious, that's so unnecessary, right? And
Yes.
I
Well,
might have forgotten your original question. Sorry, I've got
yeah,
you
you're
in my
already like,
brain.
it was so good. Yeah, we're talking about releasing resistance. You're right on track. You're on track. And I love Debbie Ford. And I was just reading Dark Side, what is it? Dark Side of the Light
Like Chasers?
Chasers or something like that. Anyway, Debbie
Yeah.
Ford. And I love what she talks about in there about, and I'm probably paraphrasing heavily now at this point. And it's because, you read a book and you're like, there's the stuff that they said, and then there's all of your interpretation of it. This is the fun of reading and hearing podcasts. It generates your own stuff inside. And so I love, and what you're talking about here with this idea of not making it wrong. And I did a whole podcast episode on like, you don't need to be fixed. Right. And I think when we're resisting the shadow, that's sometimes what it looks like. It's like there's just this problem to be solved instead of this part or this experience to be known. And I don't really even remember if that was Debbie's like approach to this, but that's how I thought about it. Was this is a part to be known, because with anxiety, even if we use that for example, if we're not resisting it and trying to fix it, and we just go into it, and I think about it like feelings, I think they're like messengers. They're standing there holding a message, and they're like, I'm just going to hang out here until you take the message. Right. And so if we, like you're saying, if we're not resisting it and we embrace the quote unquote shadow, we're really saying, I can be present to it. I can be witness to it. I can show up to myself. It's a getting to know yourself process in that, because that's part of you presenting itself. It's not a problem. And inside of it, it's either there's something inside of there. There's even a gift in there, or there's a learning, there's a message, there's something. And that's the point, not to just make it wrong and move on.
Yeah. And oftentimes these parts of ourselves too are tied to protective mechanisms, right? And so when I do work with people around self-discovery and really going into these parts of themselves, I see so many people, especially leaders and entrepreneurs, that as they get to higher and higher levels, they actually can oftentimes disconnect themselves more from parts of themselves, because it's like we get into this mindset work and we're so focused on our future self and what we're creating and all of this stuff. And it's like, and it can be, I sometimes see people, not everyone, but I sometimes see people can get to this place where they're like, oh yeah, I'm feeling anxious and let's just go anyway. And let's just bam, bam, and push through and it's like, and sometimes I actually think that can be a beautiful thing, right? Like one of my coaches, and mentors that I listen to a lot talks about that, right? Where she's like, we can sometimes get into this place where we just want to self-coach ourselves all the time. Oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. Let me coach on that before I go do a Facebook Live. Okay. Oh, I'm feeling a little anxious. Sorry, Jessica, I need to reschedule that podcast interview until I feel amazing. Right. And so that can really stop your progress, and that can be used as a way to buffer, really. Right.
Yeah. And I just want to add something there. I think that part of the work is when you do this work of getting to know these parts of you, it's like when you get to know your friends or your partners or your people, like you start to understand the nuances. And you start to understand like, this is what they need in this moment. It's the same thing with yourself, where you're like, oh, is this anxiety that I am just stuffing down? I am shaking up the soda bottle and like something's going to blow off later. Or if this is just like old familiar, like, oh yeah. Like that's kind of like the level it hangs around, comes up. It's really benign at that level. I can just notice it, not make it a problem, versus, oh, this is some anxiety where like there's a message there. And this is where you start to, and like, I won't go too much into the weeds, but this is where you're starting to develop a relationship. This is where thought work comes in, but also body work, right? Like when you know the difference, like you feel it in your body. And listen, I'm like throwing this out there. This is like a whole skill set, y'all. This is like a lifetime of learning. And this is why, again, that's why you have people like coaches or therapists or something, or you're just support people, whoever, even in your natural support system, that can help you navigate this. Because also sometimes when you're in it, you don't know, am I powering through? Or is this the part where it's functional for me to be like, oh yeah, I'm noticing anxiety at a level 2, 3 on the scale today. And this is just part of getting up and talking in front of somebody. And this is just familiar. And this fuels me actually. Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. That was so well said. And that's actually part of it's part of all of that. Like this has been coming up so much. I'm actually getting ready to launch a program around this on and I'm going to call it the School of Self-Discovery. I'm going to teach people how to do that. And I am so excited because it's exactly like you said. I'm like, okay, like knowing that difference, it's that wisdom, it's that discernment that you begin to be an expert in yourself as you do the work, because there are times when, like you said, yeah, it's just the normal anxiety. And then there's other times where I can tell, I'm like, no, like this is something important. And it's like, if there's, I've used that example, lately of that, that little 10-year-old inside of me, which is when all my binge eating started and a lot of that kind of stuff. And it's like, there's a lot of wounding there that happened that I have over the years learned to really heal and nurture a lot, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't come up sometimes. And when it does, I'm like, that's not a little girl that I'm just going to blow over and ignore, right? And be like, you're afraid, you're feeling a little anxious or afraid or scared or depressed or unworthy or whatever. Like, listen, I don't have time for that. Like, we're going to
Right.
get
That's
this
not
stuff
the
done.
suck it up buttercup moments.
That's not the
That
suck
is
it up
not the time
buttercup
for that.
moment. And how do you learn the difference? How do you know which is which? And I think I love the way that you describe that.
Yeah. You can see, like, this is why the first episode, when I was on Robin's podcast, we totally jammed out for like 30 minutes afterwards, because we're like, oh, we get so excited about the same things. Because I have something for you guys. I don't even know if I'll tell you all yet, but I have something exciting. You're going to be listening to this in May. And because June is my birthday month, I have a whole treat on a getting to know yourself little gift for all y'all listeners. So stay tuned. I love this, like, little cliffhanger. I'm just going to keep y'all excited. I'm not even going to tell you what it is. It's so fun. But you said something, you kind of started talking about, you mentioned binge eating, and you've talked about, like, mental health challenges that you've experienced, and maybe that's it. I don't know, like, but maybe now's the time, again, in the spirit of normalizing, I think is one of the words you used earlier. Tell us about, like, what are some of the, I mean, maybe not the most significant, but maybe the most significant mental health challenge, or some of them. What has that experience been for you?
Depression, anxiety, unworthiness.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my themes. Depression, anxiety, unworthiness, over and over again.
And I just wanted to, can we pause right there? I just want to, like, say, like, who else is raising their hand right now?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because I think Robin asked a similar question to me, and I was like, oh, can we just tell, like, self-doubt all the way, like, how many different versions? And that's what, and it shows up that way, right? Like, when we have insecurities, we question our worthiness. A lot of times it's going to show up in depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms. Yeah. So if you, however much you want to share with us, tell us about that. And then, and also the process, right? Like, there's the dark, right? There's the stuff, and then there's the growth, the learning that comes from that. So what are you going to share?
Let's see. I mean, so those are my shadows: depression, anxiety, and worthiness. They have been with me for a very long time. Unworthiness is the root cause of all of it. Like, right, the depression and anxiety is really a secondary byproduct of that feeling of unworthiness. And I will be sharing a lot more about this over the coming, year. And as I really unpack a lot of this for all you guys. So if you're interested, you can come find out more about that. But the quickest way that I could probably describe it for your listeners here is that there's a core wound that happened. A lot of that core wounding was around rejection and neglect, and also some abuse. So there are a few different ones, sort of like with, different models that we have in our brain. For those of you that know about the model and the life coach school and all of that, right? It's like all these different models happening. But the point is just to say that there's more than one feeling happening at a time. There's more than one core wound. However, for me, my core wounds around, neglect and rejection and abuse too, those core wounds created a belief inside of me that said, I am unworthy. And so that belief of unworthiness created all of these byproducts, right? That unworthiness is what created the anxiety. It's what created the depression, but it created them as a way to protect me. And so I use the analogy oftentimes. I heard Tara Brach share this story, and it's a perfect analogy of the Buddhist statue. There's a gold Buddhist statue. Have you heard this story?
Yeah,
right?
covered in mud.
Covered in mud, right? So I may not tell it perfectly, but it's this idea where there was like this village, many years ago, and they had this big, beautiful gold statue of the Buddha, and there was like a war coming, I believe, and so and they knew that they knew that things were about to happen, and there was a war coming, and they wanted to protect that statue. And so all these monks came together and they covered it in mud and clay so that it looked ugly on the outside. And it worked. And it worked. And this war came and all this stuff happened. And it's like, and the statue remained untouched. And all these years after, though, by the time it was over, they had all forgotten about the Buddha, the gold underneath the mud. And they all moved on with their lives. And it wasn't until I think maybe like a century later or something, she said a long time later, with the weather and certain things, the mud had finally began to crack open with, weather changes and pressure and whatever. And that pressure began to crack open the mud. And there was someone walking by who saw a glimmer of something in one of those cracks. And he came and shone a light in there. When he shone a light in, he discovered all this gold.
Yeah.
And that is the process of self-discovery that I believe each and every one of us is called to, because what we do is we cover ourselves with mud.
Right. And can we just like highlight, I just point out, like two things that I want to highlight. And one is like, obviously this is the whole Unblocked thing, right? The whole story behind even titling my podcast that Unblocked is this idea that this is not an addition problem. It's a subtraction problem. It's about removing those layers of mud. It's about removing the blocks to the awareness of what's already inside of us, like the gold, the gift, right? That's inside. So I think that's just such a point to highlight and remember. And then I think I didn't remember this part of the story, but the way you told it was then there was pressure and that started to crack the mud and the light shone through. Right. So I think this is just even as we're reframing the idea, like shadows, or as we're reframing these quote unquote bad things that happen, sometimes it's the pressure that cracks the facade so that the truth can come through. Right. So like if we tie that back into the story we were telling a moment ago, just about anxiety, right? Like if that's the mud, that's the pressure. It's like, that's the pressure sometimes that will crack. So it's like, there's something inside, there's gold inside of that.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, I want to invite you to come join us on May 19th through the 21st for the Shadowside Leadership Summit. It's going to be an entire weekend where we're going to dive into these conversations around identity and leadership, around mental and emotional health, around how to support ourselves so that we can truly lead others in a more impactful way, that we also get to experience connection and joy along the journey. ShadowsideLeadershipSummit.com. Go sign up and we'll see you inside. 100%. And just to be fair, I may have added that part of the story. I don't know.
It's perfect, Robin. If you did, this is why storytelling's beautiful. Over the years, it changes and we glean even more from it.
Yeah.
I hope you made that part up and that just added to the whole story.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
Yes.
100%. And it really comes back to also how we ended up here even doing this project, right? Like it was the pressure that I was going through and experiencing with my own changes and transitions and growth and all that triggered all that stuff. And again, like same thing, like something beautiful came out of that, right? And I think there are people out there and I just to honor this for a moment, like I get it. Like I can just hear certain listeners out there like, listen, I'm not trying to paint, lipstick on a pig here. Like, I don't want to love these things about my life. I don't want to love the abuse and the ugliness and I don't want to love these parts of myself. Like, right. Like I hear that in my head. I can hear the thoughts already, right? Like, and I've heard that from people, so many people before, where they're like, and I've gotten nasty emails from people, right? Like, how dare you just tell people to love these parts of themselves? Like, that's just such bullshit. And you've got this ADD brain and you're not emailing your list regularly and you're not showing up and you'll just ghost us for months while you're going through whatever the hell you're going through. And here you are just making that okay. Right. And so, and I think sometimes what that comes from is that inability. We're afraid to love ourselves the way we are. I get it because, right? I get it. I have total compassion for that. We're so afraid to love these dark parts of ourselves, these imperfections, because we see it as condoning and just not caring, right? And so many people think that in order, like that shaming the part is what makes it, right? That somehow makes it more acceptable, right? If I shame it, then at least I'm doing the quote unquote proper thing and acknowledging that this part of me is ugly.
Yeah.
Does that
Can
resonate?
we? Yeah. Cause as you were saying that, I was thinking, like, one, there's like that conditioning there, right? That you're like, oh, I'm looking around and this is what we're supposed to do, right? I look outside of me and I see just like, if there's something, we make these parts wrong, that feels right. But also it's like behind that, what we hear is a little bit of this idea that's the only way to facilitate change. Like that I have to make myself wrong. And I know it's like, it's such like a brain break to think it's like the dialectics, right? This acceptance and change, that change could actually, that I can love something and change.
Yes.
Right.
But it's this idea, like the opposite. You have to love it in order to change it. Right?
I know. It's like for people listening who have like not done the work, you're like, lies. I know. It's like some of it, you're like, right. It's hard to wrap your mind around this. Really. It is hard to mind. Like, if I love something, why would I change it? Right.
The perfect analogy for me was my weight loss journey, right? And with like, I remember the day that I was house sitting and I stepped on this scale and I was over 200 pounds. And I was like, huh. And I was on the phone with my sister and I was like, weird. And she's like, what? And I was like, oh, this scale must be broken. I literally thought that. I literally said that. And she was like, what? I was like, oh, the scale is broken. And she just was like, so sweet, very gentle. But she's like, sweetie, she's like, the scale's not broken. And I was like, what? Like, how did this happen? Right. And I was like, and there was a lot of other things that went into me wanting to really lose that weight. And it wasn't really just about the weight. A lot of it was just truly my own mental and emotional, physical health. Like there was a lot going on there where I knew it was a byproduct of some internal work that I really wanted to do. However, all that to be said is like losing weight, trying to shame yourself literally does not work. It doesn't work. Most of the time, it's like it might work for a little bit and then you come right, it's like you rebound back and it's not sustainable. So it's like there are people who will do it for a little while, right? Just like anger can be really motivating. I can get some stuff done when I'm mad, but I don't want to stay there. It's not sustainable. That's not the emotion that I want to be fueling it because eventually you'll burn out. So if you're trying to lose weight from shame, if you're trying to change your marriage by nagging, if you're trying to, get your kid to do something, if you're using those types of emotions, shame, anger, regret, judgment, criticism, criticizing yourself or someone else, if that's what's fueling the change that you talked about, Jessica, just think about it for a moment. How long are you going to want to live there? There will come a day where you're going to abandon that strategy and go back to what you were doing because that sucks to live like that.
Well, and of course, and especially to that example, you're like, and when it feels terrible, you're like, I want to try to find something to make me feel better quickly, right? And like might mean putting something in your mouth because we get the quick dopamine hit and right. Like, so interesting. And as you were saying, like I was trying to think about, I was like, because this comes up all the time and I don't sit around and think, I'm always like, I need to find the analogy of like, what is something that when you're filled with so much love for it, that you engage in change. And I don't even, as you were talking, the idea that came to
my body.
Oh yeah.
The moment that I began to truly love myself, like really, just as I was, like I felt fat and that was okay. And I like literally, as I began to realize all the stuff that was underneath my binge eating and why I was having and all of the things, like I was overcome with such compassion and love for that
Mhm.
person inside of me. And the more I began to love myself and love my body, the change became so easy because it
Mm,
was an act of love.
mm. And that I want to double click on what you just said there. The change became easy
Yeah.
because it was an act of love, right? Like I think when we talk about change from a place of hatred, love, guilt, remorse, like what all of that, like, to your point, like you can change, you can white knuckle it for a period of time,
Yeah.
right? And maybe some people sustain it, like, and it's just gonna feel terrible, like it's gonna be hard, and then you're gonna be like, why am I even doing this? I was trying to do this change thing because I thought I was gonna feel better, and then I just feel terrible.
Yeah.
Right. And so the difference is doing the work to love first, right? When you are taking action as an expression of love, right? When you're engaging in like it's so, like you just said, it's the change is so easy when it's coming
Yeah.
from a place of
And
love.
not to mention you get to feel better right away because it's like if you're trying to enact change from those negative emotions that don't feel good
Mm,
because you think you need them. I have to shame this part of myself. I have to beat myself up for not getting up earlier, for not getting my work done or following my calendar or whatever it is. It's like if that's what you're thinking in your head, I need this, I need to beat myself up in order to be better, then even when you get to that place where you're quote unquote better, you're still not
mhm.
going to be happy because you
Right.
haven't learned to love yourself. So what's the point?
Right. And then that feels like, and I know, I'm sure people listening have, like, you've been at that place where you're like, oh, snap, like shit. Like, I've done this thing I've been efforting at for some people, maybe your whole life. And then you get there and you look around and you're like, oh, this ain't it. Like, I still feel the same way. And that can be some despair moments, right? When you're like, because then it's like when all those stories, and then you're like, well, now there's something just really wrong with me, right? If it's like I can't
Totally.
even fix this, I can't change it, right? And it's just the point here is that it's just we're looking at the wrong thing, right? Like
Yeah.
we're trying to change something physical, something out there, instead of doing the work of changing what's going on the inside,
Yeah. And learning to love you right where you are. Like
right? Where you
I got the house, I got the kids, I got the job,
are.
got the money, I did all the things. And you arrive there and you're like, there is no worse place to be depressed than Hawaii. Right. Like, it's like, I had that experience where I'm like, hold on a second. I'm in Hawaii. I
Yes.
did all the things. I got out. And then it's like, and I'm still, and it's like, wow, because it was like in your face, like, oh, like it's
Yeah.
me. It's a
Yeah. I mean,
me.
if I'm talking about like part of my, dark journey, like, I mean, that was sort of it. Like I was I mean, I don't know, similar back, but like having childhood stuff where there was neglect and rejection and there was addiction and mental health stuff in the home. There was all this stuff. And so I spent my whole life trying to outrun that. Right. And I was like, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
just be valedictorian, get the straight A's, go to school, go to grad school, get the degree, get the husband, get the job, get the career, get the money, get the whatever. And then I looked around and I was like, turns out I can't outrun myself,
Yeah.
right? Right. It was like, oh, I have all this, like similar to you, right? Like when we have these experiences, this is what I work with people so much on. Like we have these experiences and it's like a story gets imprinted, right? Like if it's, neglect or whatever, you're like, so what would that mean? Oh, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy of love. There's something wrong with me. We have these stories. And then we can spend a lifetime
Yeah.
trying to disprove that story,
Yeah.
right? Instead of doing the work to massage that story, let that go, look for the evidence that you already believe of the opposite. We end up, right? Like, at least for me, I guess I'll say me, I was like, oh, if I just do all of these things,
Yeah.
then I'll get to believe. Right. And then flash forward and I was like, oh, right. You hit that moment, you're like, turns out, yeah, brain's still gonna brain. Like if
Yeah.
that belief is still there, if the stuff is still there, it's like it is like the frosting on a poop cake or like the lipstick on the pig. Like it's all still
Mm-hmm.
underneath there. I just put a layer on
Right.
top. Yeah.
Right.
And then you're like, okay, well, now I mean, and listen, if you get to that place, that's okay too. Like sometimes that's part, like that's part of me. I was like loving myself. That was the journey. I love the therapist I have where she was like, yeah, and we're just not going to make that wrong either. And I was like, this is what we do. Like, like my brain was like, okay. Like we don't have to make that wrong. Like even that was part of the journey. It's like, like that was like, you used the word protective, like, yes, like so much of ourself is just trying to protect ourselves. And I think it's so fun to look at like even these things that come up that we think are shadows or whatever. And we look at it and question, like, how is this trying to protect me? How is it trying to serve me? Right. Like even that you're like, oh, then you can have some of that compassion for yourself. Yeah.
And it's like, and I like just like that. Yeah, like I did the weight loss journey the other way. Great. Now I know, right? And now I can help other people that don't want to do it that way. But if you want to do it that way, it's all good. Like go for it. Like it's not about right or wrong. It's just about noticing that, like, yeah, is this serving me? Is this how I want to go through this? And we don't have to make it wrong, any of our experiences or the way. How often do you work with people that are like, oh my gosh, and it's like, you're coaching with them and they begin to realize all this stuff that they never knew, that change in their life is like totally transformed, and then they start beating themselves up that they didn't figure it out sooner.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
All
I
the
might have used
time,
this
right?
example when I was talking to you before that I think of the people that I worked with in my past career of people I worked with who were struggling with addiction. And when they like in an effort to avoid uncomfortable feelings, like that's really what's under addiction. They're numbing out, right? They lose their civil liberties, they lose their family, they lose their kids. And then when they do the work and they start to feel their feelings and they get familiar with what the vibration of shame feels like in their body or guilt, and then they just break down. They're like, oh my gosh, like I gave up my life out of fear for this. Right. And then it like 2 points, like then there's the layer of the work to be like, yeah, and
Okay.
like we don't, right. And it's okay. Like this is what like, and like this is right. Because otherwise then we spin ourselves down in wholesale, making ourselves wrong for
I think one of the things that really helped me with that too was realizing that every life has value and that you can't do it wrong.
every life has value. You can't do it wrong. That's so good.
Right? Because it's like if you're judging yourself, you're automatically it's like you're just anytime you're in judgment of yourself or others, it's like you're creating a hierarchy. And you're saying that, it's like this, and honestly, I believe that this is the foundation of where bigotry begins, and all of these versions of judgment, right? To say that one is better than another, that it's better to be rich than it is to be poor, that it's like it's all of these things. It's better to be, a therapist than to be a drug addict. It's better to be, this than that, and it's better to be skinny than to be fat, or whatever. And so it's like, and then there are people who judge skinny people. There are people who judge people of color. There are people who judge, all kinds of bodies and careers and money and all of this stuff. And I'll never forget, the moment one of the as a paramedic, when I was still working as a paramedic full time, specifically as a 911 paramedic, I remember going on this call and with this lady that was just covered in feces, like it was dried, and she was pretty much not wearing clothes. And this
Like she's like, she was naked, Rob. Like, she was pretty much
she had
not
like underwear on, but like no shirt, no bra, no shoes, no pants. I mean, it was just like she was naked, covered in feces, and just like completely, but like obviously had some like mental health stuff happening. And anyway, this TriMet bus driver called for her and had stopped the bus and gotten off. And this TriMet bus driver, and I don't know if any of you know much about paramedics or EMS or law enforcement or nurses or any people in the helping fields of any kind, but they can get a little jaded.
Little dark humor.
Right, and stuff. And it's like, and compassion fatigue and all of that stuff. And it was interesting as I was standing there noticing this, I was like, in that moment, like she's like, this person, she needs help, but there's legal things, like we couldn't take her against her will because she was, in fact, she was alert, she was oriented, she knew who she was, where she was. And so she wasn't confused enough to be able to kidnap her. So I was like, all right, well, I can't just take her against her will. Like, do you want to go? And I noticed myself, like, I spent some time with her trying to talk to her. Hey, can we help you? Let me get you to the hospital. We can get you a shower. Like, we can get you where you, whatever. She ended up not wanting to go. But as I was standing there, I noticed myself feeling like kind of neutral about it. I was willing to take her. I was happy to like talk to her, offer her the ride, but I didn't really care that much. Right. I was also just as happy to let her walk down the street. and be like, good luck. Right. I was sort of, but this TriMet bus driver, I could tell, like you could feel her level of love and care and compassion was just way, way higher than mine. And she was super invested and it was just interesting. And then I'm thinking my partner or other paramedic, they might actually be annoyed. Why did you call me if she doesn't want help? I mean, geez, don't you know, right? Like, why? Because our lovability, our worthiness is all 100%. It's not about whether or not that person's life had worth or value. Right? It's like, it's just that's whether or not someone loves you is about their capacity to love.
Right.
And so when we look at that person's life, I fully believe that that person and all the people in this world are here expanding our universe, expanding potential. Like she has value. And even with her being there, she brought value into my life.
Right.
As I thought about that and as I really considered that. And right. And you never know.
Well, as you're saying that, I think something to highlight, and you kind of started off with before the story is saying like you can't do it wrong, like you can't be wrong, because even as you're saying, it's like sometimes love is allowing the version of that person to exist.
Exactly.
Right? Like in
That's what
that
I mean.
moment,
Yes.
like again, I worked actually I worked with a lot of first responders in the emergency medicine world, and voluntarily taking people to the hospital versus involuntarily, and would have to remind first responders like it's not illegal to be sick. Right.
Exactly.
It's not illegal to be poor. It's not illegal to have different values where your house is kept in a certain way. Like if you are not an imminent danger to yourself or somebody else, you get to live that way. And that can have a whole, and I think like you were hitting on that with all these different, boxes that fat, thin, rich, poor, this color, that color. It's like the version, like it's a whole skill set of saying the version of you that exists and allowing it, that's love. Right. Like this whole moral of the story here is like the version of you wherever you are, like that is worthy. And that you might change that version. It might go somewhere down the road. And like that version also loving. So,
and I'll be honest, it's hard for me even in certain places, but it's like I believe that to be true. Like when I look back at my life and the version of me that was homeless and broke and addicted and living in my car and had lost my friends and my family. I mean, I was just like at one of my rock bottoms. And it's like that version of Robin, I look back at her and like I am so effing proud of her. Right? I'm just like, holy cow, look at you go. Right. And when I look at the version of myself where I got to, like you said, I got the money and the career and I'm, making six figures and I have 2 weeks off a month and I can go anywhere I want and travel, all the things, my whole dream came true and I was miserable. Right. And it's like that version of myself. And like she was worthy. And it's like, I will be honest, there are days where I think about certain political figures or people in the world where I struggle with that. And that's right. And it's like, and even then there's value. I believe that. And I'm like, this human life is somehow expanding our universe. And I don't know exactly how, but maybe in this moment, it's here to teach me how to love more radically.
Yeah, I'm smiling and laughing a little because like I'm always like those people who really get you. I'm always like that's my guru. This person is my guru. Right? Like it's good. I don't know what it's
condone their
for.
behavior. It doesn't not mean I condone their behavior or anything like that. But I do believe that every human life, that it is worthy.
So good. And I hear those words and I know just again, I think about the listeners with like so much compassion where you're like, I am not there. Like I am not there that I just I can't look. And so for the person who is in that place where you're like, if you think of a spectrum, they're like, I am here and worthiness is like on the other side of a mountain.
Yeah.
What do you say to that person?
For themselves, you mean?
For themselves. Yeah. That they're like, if they're like, I am 800 miles and on the other side of the mountain away from worthiness. If they're in that, if it feels that far away or that inaccessible.
Yeah. One of the things I think you could start with when you feel that unworthy and wrong and broken, whatever it might be for you that's coming up, is, I think there was a moment in my life and that everything shifted. It was not in an instant, but it was the sentence that saved my life. I remember having a thought when I was literally, if I had looked around at the evidence of the world for who I was, it would have told me that I was totally unworthy. And from all external indications, there wasn't really much of value in this human. But there was a moment, and I believed it too, but there was a moment where I had a thought that came into my mind, and the thought was this: what if this isn't who I really am? And I had been believing that I was so unworthy. And the reason that I was unworthy was this long list of evidence, the mountain of evidence, right? The way I looked, my addiction, my homelessness, the shitty things that I had done, the people that I had hurt, the things that I had stolen, the jobs I couldn't hold down, the friends I had lost, right? Long list. But what if that list isn't what defines who I am?
Right.
What if there's something else? What if they're wrong? What if I'm wrong? What if who I am, what if this is all the mud?
Right.
What if this is the clay? What if this isn't who I really am? What if all of this is the facade?
Right.
What if what's real is something else? And that question, that possibility is what shifted everything. And so I would just invite that person to consider, in this moment when you feel utterly unworthy, just to notice, what's the evidence that you're pointing to prove that thought? And what if that evidence that you're pointing to, what if you're looking in the rearview mirror? What if you're looking in the wrong place? What if those things are just some ugly wrapping paper that got put around a beautiful heart?
Oh, so good. That's so good. That's really good. If y'all like go back and listen to that again, because that gives you like a really tangible thing to hold on to around looking for where you define yourself. And that gives so much insight into when you go to that place and you're like, this is the evidence that I'm not worthy. That list will tell you what you're using to define who you are. That's so good to just even sit with that question. I think sometimes we want an answer, but sometimes a question is really powerful. And so just to sit with the question of, what if that's not it? And that can be enough.
It can be enough.
Crack.
Totally. Because this version of Robin right now, the one that's sitting here, she was always inside of me. She was always inside of me.
So good. So good.
I just had
okay, Robin, this is so good. And we could talk for 6 days. But I'm going to be mindful of your time. Tell us, and you may have already answered this, but I love to ask all of my listeners, what does it mean to you to live an unblocked life? I'm sorry, I like to ask all my guests. Listeners too, y'all can answer it too, but I like to specifically ask my guests, what does it mean to you to live an unblocked life?
I think it's everything that we just talked about, Jessica. It's living an unblocked life is about, like you said, like allowing the mud to fall away, allowing those things that you're using to define yourself to fall away, and allowing yourself to really come home to the truth of who you really are and to live from that place, right? It's not, and I don't even, it's like to be unblocked is, it's just about allowing yourself to be, it kind of invokes this feeling of freedom for me.
Yep.
You know?
So good. Tell people where they can find you and connect with you and keep updated on the project that's coming up in May.
Yeah. So the project that's coming up in May, just go to shadowsideleadershipsummit.com and you'll find all the information about it there, and you can register to join us for that event. So shadowsideleadershipsummit.com, and then you can find me on Facebook. You can go to my website, robinkiesler.com, Robin Kiesler, KEESLER.com, and then, like I said, Facebook is one of the best places to find me. So.
All right. So good. Thank you, Robin, for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, your insight, your growth. This was beautiful. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. There was so much goodness in today's episode. So do yourself a favor, do the world a favor, share your takeaways, share your favorite parts, blast it on social media, text it to your bestie, leave a review, tell me what you thought. And of course, be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Until next time, my friends, stay open, stay free.